the Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings. I am Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for Stardate -25-1892.1. I am the Admiral in question, and if you can hear that noise in my background, that is one of my non-humanoid companions who is determined to torment me while I'm working today. Expect to see from Starfleet officers. But before we do that, let's just do the regular housekeeping, which is to say that we record these on Tuesdays at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you're an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you're welcome to join us in the screening room here in the Dauntless Discord for the recording live. You're welcome to participate in the chat. That will give you the opportunity to get to know everybody else who's here at this time of the day and to pose any questions or comments you might have to me directly. We also do our best to stream this to YouTube. That looks like that might be working right now. So if you are not an active duty member of the crew, you're welcome to join us in the YouTube chat. Hopefully I'll see your question or comment, and I might be able to address it as we go when we get to the end at the Q&A section. If you are in the chat and you do have a question or a comment that you'd like me to see and like me to address during the Q&A section at the end, please make sure that you mention me, that you @tag me, so that it's highlighted on my screen. When I get back to the end, I can scroll up and see if there are any highlighted comments. These cats are terrible. And I can, I'll then know to address that question rather than looking back through the entire chat to see what may or may not have been addressed to me, which could take a long time. And since these things can run a little long sometimes, it's best if I not waste time unnecessarily. So please make sure that you @tag me if you have something for my attention. But next thing is, who am I? Why would you want something to be for my attention? Who are we? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? So we are the USS Dauntless, which is a future-focused advocacy and action group that it is at its core a Star Trek fan club. We are a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is the world's largest organized fan-run Star Trek fan community. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary, so we've been around for a long time. And it's an organization that consists of thousands of members in hundreds of chapters, dozens of countries around the world. And we are the local chapter based in Cape Town, South Africa. Now, our core hub of community and activity is actually online on our Discord server. So that allows us to have members that are not only based in Cape Town, South Africa. We have members from all over the place, and we have a structure that allows us to manage both online and in-person interactions using that system. So that's what we are, that's who we are, and that's why we are here. So specifically, why are we here today? We are here to talk about about what does it mean to behave like a Starfleet officer. What is that? What does it look like? And what ought it to look like? So to start off with, neither Starfleet International nor the USS Dauntless has a formal code of conduct. Starfleet International has something similar, I suppose. It's called the list of rights and responsibilities, but that isn't intended to dictate limits of behavior. It's more kind of a set of recommendations for how to engage with your membership. I probably should have had that called up here, but we're not really going to address it, so it doesn't really matter. On the Dauntless, we have discussed in the past formalizing a code of conduct, but we've never gone through with actually passing it. And I'll talk about why. So firstly, we don't feel, when I say we, I mean the command staff of the Dauntless, and I think the same is true to a large extent of the command staff of Starfleet International itself. We are not in the business of policing personalities of our members. That's not what we're interested in doing. Starfleet we recognize that Starfleet, your Starfleet membership and your Starfleet career, even though it might be an important part of your life, and we hope it is not the beginning and end of your identity. We recognize that there's more to who you are than just a Starfleet officer. There's going to be other aspects to your life, your family, your relationships, your other careers, your religions, social entanglements, that kind of thing. These are all aspects to your identity as a person that are probably outside of and beyond your Starfleet identity. And we don't want to be involved in dictating how you may or may not behave, even when you are at a Starfleet activity, even when you're physically engaged in Starfleet. We don't want to be policing people's behaviors. And this stems from one of the core values of Starfleet, the fictional Starfleet, which is the organization from Star Trek that we model ourselves on, and that is the Vulcan principle of IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. We recognize that people come in all shapes and sizes, and that means not only people in the world, but people, beg your pardon, people within Starfleet. And that diversity is something that is worth enjoying, examining, and treasuring. And so we don't want to inhibit people's ability to express themselves. Now, there are natural limits to that. If you want to belong to an organization, there is a certain set of behaviors and criteria that one must adhere to in order to belong, in order to be part of it. And some of those even involve how we present ourselves physically to the world. But we want to put as little limits on people's behavior, natural tendencies, as possible. We don't want people to have to inhibit themselves in order to be part of Starfleet. That's not why we're here. That's not what we're about. That doesn't recognize the principle of diversity the way that we like it. And we encourage our officers, our personnel, to be plural, to be pluralistic. Enjoy the different aspects of your life. Allow them to not allow, that's not the right word. We would like to encourage everybody, every Starfleet officer, to fill out your life as much as possible with as many different aspects of life as possible. Put Starfleet in its proper place. It's something that's important, something that we hope that you are dedicated to. But it's very important to have other things going on in your life too. And not just because there isn't enough Starfleet stuff to do to fill out your day. Well, there possibly is, depending on how busy you are. But just because a well-lived life involves lots of different things. And that's what we would like to see from every one of our officers. That's what I would like to see from every one of my crew. But if we are not prescriptive about behavior, then what does it actually mean to behave like a Starfleet officer? What is a Starfleet officer? How do you recognize one when you see one? If we choose to wear the uniform, what does that signal? What does that tell people about us? And what does it require specifically? So let's talk about the uniform for a while. I'm not going to go into the details about the various elements of the uniform. I'm talking about the uniform as a concept. It's not clothing, not really. What it is it's a declaration. When you put on your Starfleet uniform, you are visibly affiliating with an institution, the institution of Starfleet, the institution of the Dauntless. Although those are two distinct institutions, they are related. We can think of them as being one and the same for the purposes of this discussion. You are choosing to be read as a representative of that organization, of that community, and of every other member of that group. And you are stepping into a symbolic space where you are a living, breathing, walking symbol of everything that institution represents. Most people outside the organization, so people who are not Starfleet officers, don't know our policies. They're not as intimately aware of Starfleet and how it works and how it operates as we are. This is not public information it's publicly available information, but it's not information that most people will bother to seek out and absorb. They don't know our structure. They don't know our values framework. They see a Starfleet officer, someone in a Starfleet uniform. And humans generalize. So they will extrapolate based on what they see in front of them, a Starfleet officer, and generalize to the rest of the institution, the rest of the organization, every other member of this group. So when you're in uniform, you don't get to control the narrative. You only control your conduct, the way that you behave. You don't get to decide how other people perceive you, but you can decide how you project yourself to those other people so as to influence their perception in as positive and accurate a way as possible. There's another important aspect about uniform specifically is that internally, there's a lot going on in the uniform that has meaning: branch of service color, rank insignia, com badge, specific uniform set style, that kind of thing. Those all represent and mean something within our organization. It's an internal form of communication. Your rank specifically represents and reflects your history of contribution over time. It tells us how long you've been a part of this organization and the amount of work that you've done, more or less, during the tenure of your career. Your rank is a recognition of your dedication over time. We also understand that within this organization, rank itself doesn't automatically equal authority, although there are a handful of positions within Starfleet International that are coupled to a specific rank. Generally speaking, rank is a recognition of what you've done in the past, not a codification of what you can do now, generally. But to people outside the organization, they don't have that knowledge, right? They're not familiar with that. So what they see, now, first of all, they can't read our insignia. They just see a black block with a bunch of gold dots on it. They don't know that that means admiral, right? They don't know that your one gold dot means ensign. They don't know that your gray panel with white stripes on it means that you're an NCO. They don't know what that means. They can't read our rank insignia. They can't distinguish between an ensign and an admiral, right? So what that does from an external point of view is the uniform collapses the hierarchy. Internally, we have a hierarchy of ranks. Externally, we are all just Starfleet officers. They don't know one from another. Externally, we are all equal. In uniform, every member carries equal representational weight for the entire institution. And that's the key point that we need to be talking about today, and are going to be talking about today. So it's been a while since we've spoken about the values that I've articulated for being a Starfleet officer. So I want to bring those back again today. The 3 core values that I believe are what makes up a Starfleet officer. Those are courage, dedication, and a love of Star Trek, which can alternately be formulated as a spirit of exploration. But those are, from my point of view, those are just 2 different ways of expressing the same idea. And the reason I fall on those 3 values is because I believe and maintain and argue that it's from those values that the behavior of a Starfleet officer flows, right? That's the source of all of our behavior, and then it manifests in the way that we interact with the world. So let's go through these one at a time. The first one is courage. Now, courage isn't just emotional restraint, right? Courage means acting despite fear, which in Starfleet practical sense means doing what is needed even when it's uncomfortable. That might be something like volunteering when it would be easier to stay silent, right? I don't mean volunteering in the formal sense. I mean stepping up and doing the work, even when it would be easier to sit there and wait for someone else to step up. It means taking responsibility when something needs doing rather than waiting for someone else to do it. It means initiating difficult conversations, and also accepting the risk of imperfection. We spoke at length about this in a briefing a few weeks ago about failure as being a critical aspect and a point of growth for a career in Starfleet officer. So accepting the risk of imperfection, that's part of the courage that comes with it. It also includes, more practically, emotional regulation. So being aware of your own emotional state and managing it. Owning your mistakes. So when you do inevitably fail, and it's part of life that you fail, that you recognize your own failure and take ownership of it. Okay, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about failure today. I've spoken at length about that before. facing criticism without defensiveness. So when you fail, when you make a mistake, people are going to have something to say about it, and you need to be able to accept and take that criticism on board, and decide whether it's valuable, useful, interesting, true, but not get defensive about it. Be able to receive it for what it's worth. And then resist temptation. That this is one's pretty broad. Temptation to do things that are not useful. What's the word? Destructive, right? That can mean resisting the temptation to have that third donut, right? Because you know that you've already hit your kilojoule limit for the day and your uniform's getting a little tight. It could be resisting the temptation to get stuck into that argument on that thread online, even though you know you have something that you'd like to say about it, but participating in that conversation would not be constructive. It could be resisting the temptation to slack off at home on the couch when there's a priority one mission happening today. That kind of resisting of temptation, that takes courage, because you're standing up to yourself for what you think is important. So courage has two faces, right? The first one is forward motion despite fear. The other is stability despite pressure. Courage isn't loud. Courage often looks like restraint, holding back from what you think you'd like to do in the moment because you know that it's important not to act. Starfleet officer doesn't wait to feel ready. They act because the mission matters. Now let's talk about the second value, dedication. Dedication is long-term consistency. It's a different kind of fortitude from courage. Courage is the fortitude that drives you to do the important thing the first time. Dedication is the fortitude that keeps you coming back and doing the important thing every time. What that looks like is it looks like reliability, discipline, showing up when you say you will, responding to your messages, following through, so completing what you've volunteered to do already, taking commitments and the organization seriously. And this relates to something that I talk about a lot as well, which is professionalism. Professionalism isn't stiffness. Professionalism is evidence of care, evidence that you are interested, not just intellectually, but emotionally invested in the outcome of what you do and the institution that you are aligned with. Dedication is not measured only in years served. Which is why time in grade is usually not sufficient to advance in rank, right? You need to have put in some work as well. It's measured in consistency. So not just how long you've been here, but how often you show up, whether that's physically showing up for missions or conceptually showing up to do the work that needs doing. The third value is the love of Star Trek. If we claim to love Star Trek, what does that imply? Within Star Trek, there are a number of ethical models, I suppose you could describe it as, that help us to think about and conceptualize and imagine what good behavior might look like, proper behavior. And those models would include something like intellectual curiosity, wanting to know more about the world around you, diplomacy, understanding the need to reach not necessarily agreement, but an accord with the people around you. Respect across difference. That's quite important. So being able to hold basic human respect for another person despite your differences from that person. Now that could be ethnic differences, it could be religious differences, biological differences, or it could be differences in political opinion. Just because we disagree doesn't mean that we have to disrespect each other. We can hold opposing views and still acknowledge each other's basic humanity. Star Trek also models measured discourse, which is exploration without hostility. So what does that mean? What does that look like? So this is the idea of exploring ideas that are uncomfortable. Again, those opposite political views, allowing yourself to explore those ideas, think about them carefully, understand them, even without agreeing with them and without becoming hostile towards the person who espouses those views. And all that ties together is optimism about human behavior, right? We can maintain an optimistic assumption that most people are, most of the time, are just trying to be good people, right? That don't always make decisions we agree with. They don't always do things that we like. They don't always think the things that we want them to think. But that doesn't make them bad people necessarily. It just makes them different from us. And that's that diversity and enjoying that diversity is that intellectual curiosity. That infinite diversity and infinite combinations implies the necessity for that intellectual curiosity about the world around you. The curiosity about the world around you isn't limited just to bugs and trees and animals and fish and birds. It also extends to the people around you and their ideas and their concepts and their worldviews. The more you can understand those, the better you can understand your own world. So, behaving like a Starfleet officer means courtesy, being courteous, thoughtfulness. It sounds like a vague word, but I feel like it's quite an important idea here. The idea of being thoughtful involves being aware that people around you are having a day too. The practical example that springs to mind when it comes to thoughtfulness is, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, you're in a supermarket, you're walking down the aisle, you're pushing your trolley, and a person in front of you is standing on the left-hand side of the aisle, and their trolley is on the right-hand side of the aisle. It's impossible for you to get past, and they're just standing there lost in their own world, gazing at the shelf in front of them. That person is not demonstrating thoughtfulness. What you want to be doing is be as thoughtful as possible. Be aware that there are people and things around you. Take up as much space as you need, but no more than that, right? Allow people to get past you. Be aware that other people are also in the world with you, and they are also having a day. They are also doing things that need to be done, that are just as important or just as urgent or just as relevant as what you're doing. Another example is listening before reacting. It can be tempting, especially when people are saying things that are emotionally charged, to jump to the conclusion or jump to the end and then want to respond immediately without really processing what it is that you've heard. Listening before reacting is essential. Engaging disagreement without hostility. This can be emotionally challenging, and this brings us back to the value of courage, where I specifically mentioned emotional regulation. Being able to manage your emotions in such a way that you can disagree with somebody without getting hostile, without getting overly emotional about it. Not that emotions are bad, but you want to be able to keep your emotions under wraps, especially, most importantly, when you are disagreeing with somebody. That is probably the most important time to keep your emotions in check, because failing to do so can lead you into trouble. You can say something that you regret. You can, yes, say something that you regret. Let's leave it at that, shall we? And the last example here is remaining curious instead of contemptuous. Again, that's part of thoughtfulness. It's part of being aware that other people hold their opinions and their views and their beliefs and their opinions for what they think are good reasons. And although you might not agree with those beliefs, being curious about why they think the way they do is more productive, more useful, and more kind than simply assuming that somebody's a bad person. Courtesy is exploration applied socially. Thoughtfulness is diplomacy applied personally. And mindfulness is cultural awareness applied daily. If we love Star Trek, we should do what we can to resemble its best ideals. All right, so let's bring those three together. Courage keeps us steady, dedication keeps us reliable, and exploration keeps us thoughtful. And those three values produce the kinds of behaviors that we like to see and hope to see and hopefully do see in Starfleet officers: courtesy, professionalism, emotional control, integrity, and discernment. To behave like a Starfleet officer is to express our core values in our conduct. Courage becomes emotional steadiness and integrity. Dedication becomes reliability and professionalism. and our love of Star Trek, or our spirit of exploration, if you prefer that formulation, becomes courtesy, curiosity, and mindful engagement with others. So notice what we've done here. We didn't invent a code of conduct. We haven't listed a set of behaviors that we expect to see. We've derived behavior from our declared values. And that's how we remain philosophically consistent. But I want to talk a bit more about the uniform, at least conceptually. So let's apply the values to context. So when you are physically in uniform, you are visibly representing the institution of Starfleet. So you don't control what people infer, you only control what you signal. So you control what you're communicating to people. What they read based on your communication is not in your control. Externally, the uniform erases hierarchy. Remember that? Other people can't read our ranks. They don't know the difference between an ensign and an admiral. So when that's the scenario when you're out in public in uniform. When you're in public out of uniform, things are different, right? You may still be implicitly representing the institution if your affiliation is known. If you're with a group of people who know that you are a Starfleet officer, even if you are not in uniform, when they look at you, they think Starfleet officer. And when they see what you're behaving or how you're behaving, they might infer that this is behavior that is typical of a Starfleet officer. So if you behave well, then they'll have a positive association with that and might infer that all Starfleet officers behave well. If you behave poorly, that the reverse may occur. So your behavior contributes to culture, whether it's visible or not. So just because you're not in uniform doesn't mean that your Starfleet affiliation is invisible, because people who know you, and they know what you're interested in, and they know what you're doing. Just because you're in a different context, in a different environment, and you're wearing different clothes doesn't mean that you're any less a Starfleet officer. At best, you can hope that perhaps the people that you're with don't know that you're a Starfleet officer. But if they don't know, why don't they know? That's an interesting idea too, something to niggle over. But there's a third context, which is a lot more complicated, and that is online. So online, all of that affiliation context kind of goes with you everywhere you go. It's sort of baked into the design of all the social platforms that we use: Facebook, X, Discord, Instagram, TikTok. All of the stuff that you're interested in, all the stuff that you belong to, all of the stuff that you're involved in follows you like a cloud everywhere you go. Cloud is perhaps not the best analogy, because cloud is a different thing in internet speak. But if you visualize it as a cloud, that's not the worst thing. If your Starfleet affiliation is visible online, so that's photos of you in uniform, attending away missions, visiting Comic-Con, that kind of thing. Maybe you've referred to your Starfleet affiliation in the text of your bio on your Instagram profile or your Facebook page. If you've shared content that relates to missions, perhaps you've reposted one of the articles that we drop about our blood donation missions. If you've done any of that, then your profile becomes a semi-public uniform. That means that your digital profile is now part of this uniform. It's a digital version of that you are always wearing. Whenever you're doing anything out online in public, you are always wearing this conceptual uniform, and people can see that you are a Starfleet officer. So, beg your pardon. My PC is misbehaving. Let's see. Okay, we're still good. Right, so your uniform becomes your your social media profile becomes your semi-public uniform. Your intent might be private, but perception is public. Everybody can see. So your audiences collapse your different contexts. So connected to your Facebook profile, you might have people who are in your family, colleagues from your work, high school friends, varsity friends, which is probably a different group of friends, your Starfleet friends, people from your church, all of those people are all connected to that one Facebook profile. And you're probably posting content about all of those different things because those are things that you're interested in, plus all of the other stuff that you like, books that you've read, movies you've watched, music you listen to, all of that kind of thing is probably all there because those are the things that you like. What's happening is that all of that content is going to all of those different audiences. So all of those audiences are mixed, and all of those different contexts, those plural contexts that exist within your life, are now collapsed into one feed, which is very difficult for you to separate out, and is impossible for the audience to separate out because they're just seeing these are the things that you're into. They can't separate out, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be looking at and I shouldn't be looking at that. Which is not necessarily a problem, right? That's how you share yourself with the world, right? And if somebody wants to know you, then it's probably for the best. They see all of the different things about you. Personally, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. That's one of the most wonderful things I think about social media, is that it allows us to do exactly that. We're no longer forced to compartmentalize different people into different aspects of our lives. We can share our whole selves with everybody. I think it can be, if done properly, can be beautiful. The issue, it's not a problem, it's not a bad thing, but it's something we should be mindful of, is that different communications, different messages, different kinds of content carry different weight in the eyes, ears, and minds of the people that we're sending to. Excuse me. What do I mean by that? So even though a post is a post is a post, a photo is a photo is a photo, a video is a video is a video, depending on what is contained within those items of media, different kinds of context resonate with different people, resonate with people differently. Simply because we happen to be the owners of human brains, and human brains are more interested in certain kinds of information than others. So there are certain topics that will get people's attention more readily than other topics. If you're posting a picture of your lunch, as exciting as it might have been for you in the moment, most people don't care. Frankly, they don't. If you're posting baby pictures, people might want to see the first baby pictures or the second or the third, but by the time you get to the 18th day in a row sending nothing but baby pictures, people are just scrolling past. Sorry, I know that your baby is something that you like, something that you're very proud of, but most people aren't all that interested in seeing it. Sorry. But there are things that people are always interested in seeing. And these are what we call high signal communications. So these are types of communication that carry stronger perceptual weight. And I'll give you some examples of that. Intimate relationships, sexual interests or proclivities, explicit or provocative humor, heated political advocacy, strong religious declarations, or highly controversial social positions. Now, that's not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good summary of the kinds of things that people are going to pay particular attention to when they see your content. And this is not only human brains, by the way, that are registering this and having it surface to the top of awareness. Algorithms baked into these social platforms recognize that these are the kinds of content that people like to see, like to read, like to look at. And so these kinds of posts will be surfaced to the top of the pile. So when your friends and family and your mom and your pastor or your imam or whoever it is goes onto Facebook and they see that your feed has been updated, if you've posted anything like this, they're going to see that first. Before they see your lunch, before they see your baby pictures, they're going to see your heated political advocacy first. Now, there is nothing wrong with any of these. There isn't even anything wrong necessarily with posting these things. The issue is context, right? So high signal topics dominate the perception of the people that are viewing it, that are seeing it, not only because of their own brains, but because of the algorithms. When shared through the same channel as your STARFLEET information, your STARFLEET affiliation, so that could just be a photo of you in uniform. Excuse me, this is Huey, he's causing trouble. When you're sharing that stuff in the same channel as your STARFLEET affiliation, your identities might become unintentionally merged, right? So this is the same thing as when you're in uniform and you're behaving a certain way, people assume that you behave that all Starfleet people behave that way. So when they see, first they see a picture of you in uniform, then they see a post of you voicing a strong religious declaration, they might infer that those two things are one and the same. And what that can do is then distort how both are perceived. Because remember, you're sending this out to multiple different audiences. Many of those audiences are not affiliated with either of those things. So not everything that is legitimate is appropriate for every context. So I want to be clear about not shaming anybody. You're allowed to have explicit or provocative humor. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. You're allowed to talk about your intimate relationships. You're allowed to share your highly controversial social positions. But what we can do is we can ask, as Starfleet, as an institution, as your colleagues in Starfleet, that you be mindful about when and how you post those things. Bearing in mind that whenever you post something like that, it is reflecting on all of us. And although some of us might agree with the thing that you say, a lot of us might not. Again, that's not saying that you shouldn't. That's not saying that you should censor yourself. That's not saying that you shouldn't talk about the things that you're interested in and the things that you care about. Only that you practice a measure of mindfulness, which is the thing that comes from love of Star Trek, the thing that comes from courage, and the thing that comes from dedication, that mindfulness, that thoughtfulness, in how, when, and where you post those things. Now, a lot of those things on that list are not necessarily optimal for a public Facebook page, for example. Perhaps talking about your sexual interests or proclivities might not be optimal on the Facebook feed where your 14-year-old cousin is going to see it pop up. Perhaps talking about your controversial political opinions might not be optimal in the feed where your boss might read it, who might not agree with that. Same is true of all of these kinds of things. What I would suggest that we all consider is finding platforms that are less public for engaging in these kinds of posts. I certainly understand the desire to want to talk about these kinds of things and to share it with like-minded people. In the same way that we have created a space here on the Dauntless where we can all share our thoughts and feelings about Star Trek with other people who are interested in Star Trek in a relatively private space here on the Dauntless, in our Discord server. I would encourage each of us to find similar spaces for these other high signal communications that probably should be left off of a public feed. So instead of posting about your dodgy jokes, for example, on X, which might feel funny, maybe a better place for that might be a private group chat with the boys. Just an idea. Again, not suggesting censorship of yourself or of anybody else, but recommending thoughtfulness in how we engage with sharing our media content. So all of this, mindfulness is the unifying principle. So we're not prescribing beliefs. We're not saying that this is what you have to believe, this is what you have to think, you have to agree or disagree with any of this. All we are asking for is that you are mindful and thoughtful about the way that you express the things that you believe. Again, that doesn't mean don't express it, doesn't mean keep quiet about it, doesn't mean keep a lid on it. It means finding the right time, the right way, the right medium, the right channel, understanding the strength of the signal that you're sending, understanding the audience that you're transmitting that message to, and recognizing that there might be multiple different unrelated audiences included in that audience, and choosing where and how to share different facets of your identity. And we recognize that, like I recognize that all of these things are part of your identity, right? If you've got a particularly spicy sense of humor, that's part of who you are, right? If you've got some unusual sexual proclivities, that's also part of who you are. And you should be allowed, encouraged, and welcome to engage in any other that and any other part of your identity. But finding the right way, the right place, the right audience to do that in is an optimal strategy, not just from a Starfleet point of view, but from the point of view of life in general. Because identity is plural, but reputation is singular. We have one reputation to defend. Every affiliation that you carry is affected by how you conduct yourself in public. And learning how to draw that line between what is or is not public is a life skill that is worth developing, honing, and strengthening. Right, so let me sum up what we've gone through today. To behave like a Starfleet officer is not to be flawless. Quite the opposite. It is to express our core values in our conduct. Courage becomes action despite fear and steadiness under pressure. Dedication becomes reliability and professionalism. Exploration, or the spirit of exploration, becomes courtesy, curiosity, and thoughtful engagement. In uniform, you define the institution. Online, you shape the institution's perception. And in all spaces, you contribute to the institution's culture. We don't police who you are. We ask you to be mindful of what you amplify. Okay, let us see if there are any questions. I saw some tags coming through. Scrolling up, scrolling up. Okay, here's the beginning. Let's see, first one from Lieutenant Davis. I've encountered people whose ideologies don't simply go against my personal beliefs, but my existence. Queerphobia isn't just a difference in opinion, it's a belief that some people don't deserve to exist. Same with Islamophobia, racism, etc. I can ignore people who ignore me, but am I expected to just take it when people are openly hostile towards me? That doesn't seem reasonable. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So, hostile is a word that's doing a lot of work there. And I can definitely recognize that when someone is antagonistic to some aspect of your identity, it can definitely feel scary. It can feel invalidating. It can feel insulting. All of those things are probably always true. What we need to be mindful of, and you don't have to put up with any of that, by the way. You don't have to put up with people being mean to you about some aspect of who you are. What that could look like is if a person is doing this to you in a social setting, you can choose to no longer socialize with that person. If it's a person doing that in a professional setting, it's a bit more complicated, but that kind of behavior typically carries with it, especially today, this day and age, will carry with it certain consequences. That there can be escalation, there can be reports, there can be due diligence, there can be, not due diligence, due process, that's the word I'm looking for, whereby people who are being openly hostile to their colleagues can be put on censure, because those are the kinds of behaviors that are against the rules of most organizations. And the same is true here in Starfleet. So although we don't have a code of conduct, we do have rules. And that kind of behavior would definitely break those rules. And if it could be demonstrated that that behavior has taken place within the context of Starfleet, that is something that can be acted upon by the disciplinary institutions within Starfleet. So we have an organization called the Office of the Inspector General, who is, I don't like to use the word police, he's not the police, but insofar as we have something that resembles the police, he is it, right? The Inspector General and his deputies. If some bad behavior has occurred within Starfleet, the Inspector General needs to be notified, all of the evidence provided to him so that he can investigate. He would then make a recommendation to the, is it called the Investigative Committee now, or is it still called the Disciplinary Committee? I should probably know what it's called, being that I'm the chairman of that committee. But there is a committee of Admiralty board members who will review the report from the Inspector General once it's been made, and will choose how to act on that. And that could mean some kind of censure against the offending member, which could be something like a reduction in rank, or it could be something like expulsion from the organization. It could even mean alerting civilian authorities if a crime has been committed, or that kind of thing. So there are mechanisms in place to manage very bad behavior. And there are parallel mechanisms in place on things like social media platforms. So if somebody's being mean to you online, on Instagram, Facebook, or whatever, you can report them, you can block them, you can make sure that that doesn't happen anymore, at least not from that person. The systems are not perfect, they're open to abuse, and people can make other accounts and that kind of thing, but generally speaking, they're about as effective as you can expect them to be. So point is, you don't have to put up with that. You're allowed to be who you are, and you don't have to deal with people being hostile towards you because of aspects of your personality. You don't need to hide who you are in order to be part of this organization. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say about that. Okay. Next question from Colonel Hubert. Just to note, discrimination disguised as humor doesn't count. That I will fight people on. A lot of people use "I was just joking" as an excuse to be awful and cruel, and that's not okay. Sure, yeah, that's fair enough. I think you can say that having a spicy sense of humor, even one that tells off-color jokes, can be a mask for just holding prejudices. It can be difficult to tell the difference between the two, but it's fair to say that some people will hide behind the "oh, I was just joking" when they're actually meant to say something mean. And again, you don't have to put up with that. There are processes in place that can deal with those kinds of people, even if it means just blocking them or walking away from them. Hopefully, you don't have to deal with that in future. I missed a question. Uniform question. Here we go. From Lieutenant Davis. Regarding hijab, long skirts and scarves, it's not clarified in the uniform section of the Dauntless website. Yes, okay, so there is so our uniform set doesn't specifically include a lot of accessories, but what I would call these kinds of things accessories. But what it does do, if we look at the Star Trek canon inspiration for our uniform set. So this uniform set comes from the Dominion War era, which is the later seasons of Deep Space Nine and the last two Next Generation films, First Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis. We see examples of Starfleet officers being permitted to add elements from their personal culture to the uniform, even though those elements are not part of the typical uniform code. So what do I mean by that? We look at Worf, who is permitted to wear his Klingon baldric with his uniform. We see Nog, who's permitted to wear the head flap thing at the back of his uniform. It's even color-coded to the rest of his uniform. We see Bajorans who are permitted to wear their Bajoran earrings with the uniform. These are not items that are part of the standard uniform code, but they can be permitted to wear with the uniform if there is a cultural, personal justification. So this isn't about, personally, I'd like to accessorize my uniform with this or that. It's about, within my cultural constraints, this item adds something meaningful and important and would or should be included in my uniform for reasons that are significant to my culture. When that happens, the process is, and you're right, I haven't mentioned anything about this on the Dauntless website, and maybe I should add that there. If there is something that you feel like you should be adding to your uniform, like a long skirt or hijab or something of that nature, you may contact the quartermaster, although we don't currently have a sitting quartermaster, in which case you can contact me directly and describe what it is you'd like to add to the uniform, and then we can figure out what that could or should look like. I think, you've posted an image there in the chat. No, it was Colonel Hubert posted an image in the chat of a Starfleet officer in one of the subsequent uniform sets, in the lower decks uniform set, that does include a hijab. We've seen it in a couple of other uniform sets as well. So there is canon precedent for doing this kind of thing. It's just about figuring out how we make it work with our uniform sets, which is something that is eminently achievable. So if that's something you're interested in doing, let's have a chat about it and we can work it out. All right. I think that's all the questions I needed to see here, but my yeoman, as is always the case, has contributed a couple of questions too. So the first one is, are you saying we can't express our personal views or interests publicly? No, that is not what we're saying. So what this question is really asking is, are we about to become restrictive, or are we being policed? And neither of those things is true. So we are all adults, at least on the Dauntless, and we are not interested in regulating people's beliefs, hobbies, politics, religions, personal identity, anything like that. What we're discussing here is signal management. Freedom of expression and stewardship of reputation are not opposites, right? They can work together. They coexist, and you can express yourself. The question is this the right channel? Is this the right audience? And is this aligned with the affiliations that are visible on this platform? Okay, next question. Isn't this just about optics? Shouldn't we care more about substance than perception? So this question is really asking, if we're good people, and we assume that if we're Starfleet officers, we are good people, why should we worry about how we look? Now, this is something that I've spoken about at length, I think. Substance and perception are not separate in public life, right? Institutions are judged by their visible behavior, by how they manifest and how they present themselves in the world. And that's not vanity, it's just a social reality. Humans are an intensely social species, and what other people think of us matters. If perception didn't matter, then the uniforms wouldn't matter. But the uniform itself is optics, right? The uniform is here to be a visible representation of our affiliation. And it carries with it the reputation. And the reputation determines whether people want to join our institution, whether people trust us to do the things that we claim to do, and whether people take us seriously. And managing that perception isn't superficial, it's strategic, frankly. Okay, next question. Where's the line? Who decides what's high signal or what's inappropriate? So this question is really asking, is this going to become subjective enforcement, right? Is there some high authority, me or somebody else with a lot of pips on their collar, that's going to decide what is or isn't okay? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a list of forbidden topics. High signal doesn't mean immoral, doesn't mean bad. It means perceptually dominant. So it's the kind of thing that people are most likely to see and notice. You don't need a rule book to know that some topics will overshadow others in people's perception of you. And that line isn't something that that is enforced externally, or we have any interest in trying to enforce, right? It's navigated internally. You yourself are responsible for what you post, and you yourself have to think about how it's done. So we're asking for discernment, not compliance, right? Nobody's going to come after your Facebook profile and say, oh, but you posted this thing. No, we're not interested in that, unless it's broken a rule. But the rules are pretty lax, as I mentioned. If anybody is unsure about any of this, the simplest test is, would I be comfortable standing in uniform at a public event, at Comic-Con, something like that, and having this same content associated with myself, with the Dauntless, or with Starfleet? And if that answer gives you pause, then that pause is useful information and can help you to tailor how you present that information. Okay, another comment there. Lieutenant Davis, I don't think we should ever assume we are good people. That's probably fair. No, I'm not sure that that's best. I think we have to operate from an assumption of some kind, and even if we know that it is perhaps a little naive, I think assuming that everybody has the best of intentions is a good place to start. We don't have to agree with how people manifest their intentions, how they choose to behave. We don't have to agree with their opinions or beliefs, but we can agree probably that most people, most of the time, are just trying to do their best. And if they're joining an institution like Starfleet, I think that's probably even more likely. So while it might not be true all of the time, if we start from the assumption that we're more or less good people, I think that's probably relatively safe. All right, one from Commander Shamali. People who should definitely not be sharing those opinions are the ones who are, unfortunately. Well, all kinds of people share all kinds of opinions, and perhaps the ones that are most noticeable are the ones who are exercising the poorest judgment in when, how, and to whom they are sharing their high signal content. Another one from Shamali, people whose political affiliations or beliefs conflict drastically with EDIC, for example. So the interesting thing about EDIC is that it permits dissent because diversity of opinion is included in infinite diversity. So here we have an overarching perception of all flavors are okay. If we subscribe to EDIC, we can't then say all flavors are okay except for that one because that one doesn't mix properly with EDIC. EDIC says everything's okay. We don't have to agree with everything. We don't have to like it, but we have to acknowledge that it's legitimate and it exists in the world, and that real people with real rights and real privileges, just like ours, are allowed to exist in it, and even if they disagree. Tina Davis, to rephrase, bigoted people who also believe they are good people. If we don't question our own beliefs and practice reflection, we risk assuming that everything we do and say is correct and others are wrong. Sure, yeah. Fair enough. I don't think we have to assume that everybody in the world is a good person all the time, right? But we can assume, I think, that most people, most of the time, are doing their best. And again, they may be bigots, and people may be people that we disagree with, people we don't like, people who don't like us. And that's okay, because they're people too. And they might be acting within the best confines of their conscience, and we don't have to agree with them. That only becomes a real problem if they try to impinge on us and what we do and how we operate. And if that happens, we have to rely on the institutions around us that provide mechanisms for us to filter those people out so that we don't have to deal with that directly. One of the, it's both a positive and a negative about having an open marketplace of ideas is that all ideas are welcome, even the bad ones. But also nobody gets to decide which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. Not me, not you, not them, nobody does. We all have to do our best with what we have. And I think that's what most people are doing. We're trying to do our best. Okay. I think we might be done for the day. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. We're not asking you to be smaller. We're not asking you to be less than you are. We're asking you to be deliberate. If you choose to affiliate with something bigger than yourself, then act like it matters. No one is forced to wear the uniform, physical or digital. But if you do, understand that it amplifies you. Make sure that what it amplifies is worth it. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.